All right, everyone. Well, I have got Josh Slattery and Mike Smith here on the call today. Josh is here in person. We've got Mike calling in from a remote location, but very grateful to have these guys on to talk to you about the new CMS final rule as it relates to Medicare marketing. Last year we had the call recording thing come out, and everybody had to learn how to adjust to that. Well, now we have some new regulations and wanted to help you understand that. So, I'm really going to turn this over more to these guys today to walk you through some key points, things that you need to know that are going to affect your business this coming AEP. So, with that, guys, whoever wants to go first.
Mike, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I'll start by just kind of bringing this back up to speed. About a couple of years ago, that's when this whole call recording started cooking up, and we were being agents and brokers being included in the definition of a TPMO, a third party marketing organization. And just 1 year ago, that was the big rage. Everyone was not sure exactly how this was going to be handled, and it was a lot to take in. We all had to make adjustments. We also took on a lot of new expenses with call recordings and things of that nature. So there was a lot of echo, a lot of chatter from last year, just trying to get used to what was going to happen heading into the 2023 AEP. And about November of this last year, we were on a call with NABIP, the National Association of Benefits and Insurance Professionals, and we were having a conversation with the Medicare Advisory Group. And the new call letter came out with the proposed regulations. And someone asked, is this just a rehash? And I looked at it a second time and I said, no, I'm afraid these are all proposed regulations that will be in addition to what we've just digested. So this is coming right smack dab in the middle of the AEP last year. And it was quite shocking that we were going to have to go through what appeared to be 744 pages worth of proposed regulations. So we put together some comments and we submitted them to CMS back in February. And it was just last Wednesday or a week ago Wednesday, that the new proposed regulations became quote unquote final. And so Josh and I, we kind of Medicare geeks, and we wanted to hash things out a little bit. And so that's kind of what led to this podcast is just to try to say this is kind of 2.0 of additional regulations. So we just want to try to lend some clarity to what's going on. Josh, anything to add to that?
No, I think that breaks it down really well. I think at this stage in the year, unfortunately, these rules create a lot of anxiety for agents because it's subject to interpretation. And a lot of the carriers will spend the summer months dissecting these rules and forming a position. Meanwhile, agents really have to react based on the most, conservative way of complying, right? Assuming that these are going to be enforced to the highest level. So I think that's what creates so much question and confusion is there's a lot of different positions. But the nice thing is even if we look back to last year, as we get closer to AEP, everything starts to make sense and everyone sort of gets aligned on these topics. So I would just say have patience. We're going to go through today, what the biggest takeaways are from our lens and how we see it today. But I would just also caution anyone that, things can change and, there's a lot to unfold here in the next few months.
So in your opinion, Josh, what would be the top 2 or 3 items that we should pound out right now?
I think that clearly the most disruptive for both field and call center is going to be the scope of appointment, bringing back the 48-hour cooling off period. So I would say number one, we want to look at that. I also think that the way they're handling business reply cards, there's some clear direction on time frame and methodology around contacting those that have filled out a BRC or a scope of appointment. And then the last thing I would say, just in terms of top 3, is probably the disclaimers and just how there's some change in the disclaimers. But there's also, impact to educational events. There's impact to how marketers can advertise in certain service areas. There's limitations around the Medicare name and logo and Medicare card. So there's a lot in here to really unfold, but I think those would be my top three.
Well, let's go at down the list here with scope of appointment being the first. We're getting a lot of questions about that right now. They're bringing a 48-hour rule to the table. Exactly what does that mean? And then let's also use an example of if somebody just called you or walked into your office, they were referred to you, and how we would handle the new scope rules going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I believe it was 2 years ago, CMS said that they were removing the 48-hour cooling off period. At the time, that really wasn't big news because frankly, it hadn't been enforced at all. In fact, there was enrollment kits that included the scope of appointment right along with the enrollment form, uh, basically alluding that you pull both of them out of the kit and fill them out at the same time. I think the carriers, when a complaint was received by the carrier CMS, an agent was asked to provide a copy of a signed scope of appointment. And the carriers were really at that point just making sure that a scope was in place. I had never encountered an agent that told me that they were disciplined by a carrier for not having it 48 hours in advance. So I think that was really just a minor change at that time, and frankly, it was unnecessary because I don't think there was really a reason for it. But now that more CTMs have come in, Medicare is really grappling, or CMS is grappling with how to handle all this. I think that the rule appears more rigid this time around. In fact, they've come out and said there's two exceptions. One is for beneficiary initiated walk-ins and 4 days prior to a valid enrollment period. So if somebody walks in to your office or to, retail booth that you're staffing at a Walmart or a provider table that you have set up, those are beneficiary and initiated walk-ins. And then 4 days prior to a valid enrollment period, so the end of AEP, on December 3rd, no 48-hour cooling off period is needed. The end of OEP. You could also, the end of IEP. Well, how about, at the end of a SEP? Again, going back to interpretation, at any point you can really find a valid election period in a lot of cases, a move, or they're dual eligible. They've lost employer group coverage. Those are valid enrollment periods too. So I would assume at any valid enrollment period, 4 days prior, all bets are off. And that makes sense, right? Some people procrastinate and they need coverage right away. This rule isn't intended to harm the agent or the beneficiary. What isn't mentioned is inbound calls. And I think that is going to be the most disruptive element of this rule. If call centers now have to wait 48 hours from the time they receive an inbound call until the time they can actually speak about benefits, you can just imagine that really turns their business model upside down. And in fact, we've been at Medicare Con just last week, a lot of chatter about this. We are hearing that call centers are gearing up for this. So they're looking at, pre-qualifying the customer when they make that initial inbound call, getting their doctors, getting their formulary, and not presenting a plan for 48 hours, but having a way to keep text messages and emails in front of that client to remind them in 2 days, we can talk to you about your actual plan. So with that, I really thought this could be real. This really could impact inbound calls. And it's, again, going back to the same common denominator, which is every carrier is going to look at this differently. When the initial rule was published, I asked several carriers directly, how does this impact inbound calls? And I was told by two that inbound calls are not subject to the cooling off period. And I was told by two others that it was. So again, we're divided here already. But the fact that they said walk-ins are allowed, if I just look at that logically, in my mind, I would say there's no difference in an inbound call and a walk-in. So, again, I really don't have a position either way. I think that the carriers are going to figure this out and put these rules in place, but it is very ambiguous as we sit here today with the respective inbound calls.
Yeah, so I think it's probably a good idea to issue somewhat of an informal disclaimer right here that these regs just came out and they are subject to interpretation. And we're simply doing what we can to try to stay on top of the changes to help our marketing partners with the guidance that they're requesting. We weren't there when they made the rules. We were able to comment on the rules, and now we're all getting to digest those rules. So yes, it's probably subject to interpretation. But would you say, in your opinion, that I think I heard you say it's going to, change the call center model, that this might be something that could be a check mark in favor of independent agents and not necessarily a check mark of favorability for call centers?
Yeah, you're exactly right. And when we look at the data, it shows that the CTM increases really came from the teledigital channel. Field-based channels are still performing very high when it comes to low CTMs, low compliance infractions overall. So for that would make perfect sense in my mind, and they've clearly put some thought into this and said, hey, there's some exclusions that pertain to field agents. Here they are. They didn't address call centers. And so I think they're allowing the carriers in that sense to say, well, if the call centers are a problem for you, well, here's your way to enforce it at a higher level, but we'll let you make that choice. I will say for field agents, one thing I'm really excited about is that our tool, Simply Enroll, this year will have a verbal scope of appointment. And that's going to allow agents to capture that scope of appointment in real time when they're on the phone with the prospect, and then have that discussion 48 hours later, or have that in-home appointment 48 hours later. So these rules are advancing a lot of the technology that we have in place today to make it easier to do business and to comply with these rules.
Yeah, and let's be real. I mean, how many Medicare beneficiaries or people turning 65 call any agent from coast to coast and say, I was thinking about this last night. I think I want to get a Part D drug plan and a Medicare supplement plan G, and I need you to sign me up right now. It doesn't happen that way. And in most cases, agents are going to have 2 or 3 conversations that may stretch over a period of days to weeks or even months as the education process sinks in. So while it might be an inconvenience in some respects, at the end of the day, for normal business practices in an independent agent's world, I don't think that this is going to have all that big of an impact.
I agree. I completely agree. I think that agents will adapt. But it certainly would, if the rule sticks as it is, I do think it will have a significant impact on the call centers. And that's, again, a win for field agents.
Okay. Let's go to your number 2 on the list. I believe that was call recordings. And my understanding is that not all calls must be recorded, that really CMS is kind of whittling it down to specifically say things that are related to sales or enrollments. Any comments on that?
No, other than I think that the main point here is that the call recordings are here to stay. They're clarifying now, as you mentioned, that it needs to be done in both the lead and enrollment process. So I think that, any kind of virtual connection, video conferencing, any kind of telepresence method is also mentioned in that rule this time around. So they're getting very clear that they want everything recorded. And again, that just goes back to the point of, whether you use Ring Central or Simply Enroll, or you have Intulse and you're integrated with your CRM, every agent needs to be able to record calls. And we have a couple solutions, that we provide. There's a number out there, but I would just say make sure that you have something in place. If you were one of those agents that said, I'm just going to go do face-to-face this year, and I'm going to ignore this, hoping that it would go away, I think that that's not the best approach. You want to be prepared and not have to drive down your efficiencies and driving across town if you don't need to. Just have a system in place that you can record calls. And again, it gets you out of jail if there is a complaint. Right now, there's a recording that will clearly state what was said between you and the beneficiary. And if there's any confusion, those unsubstantiated complaints, it's a he said, she said, can now really become inconclusive.
Well, I should at least say that NABIP and the Medicare Advisory Group heard loud and clear from comments all over the United States that we are still, as brokers and agents, not really a traditional call center, and that we want to be removed from the definition of a third-party marketing organization. And we're continuing to make that argument, and it's probably going to be good news for most of our listeners here to know that Senator Mike Rounds out of South Dakota has created a bill. They're looking for co-sponsors at this point, and it should be filed soon. And as soon as it's filed, of course, we'll be in touch with everyone to ask them to support that bill. Specifically, that will be to remove the definition of agents and brokers from the definition of the third-party marketing organization. So keep our fingers crossed on that one.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, TPMO was mentioned 163 times in the final rule. So the term needs to be clearly defined, especially if they're using it as much as they are. The fact that call centers and field agents are and lead companies, lead generators we're all bundled together. These rules don't apply to us all the same. And CMS knows that. They know the difference between a call center and a field agent because they authorize the use of a voice signature. Clearly, that is only applicable in a call center environment. And now we're moving it into the field world through things like Simply Enroll and other platforms, but still you're having to get a authorization through email or text today. It's not a true voice signature unless you're a bona fide call center. So there is a difference, and CMS knows the difference. But for whatever reason, in these rules, it's a broad description of a TPMO, and that does need to change.
Well, and we'll stay tuned on that, Bill. The third point that you made regarding, I believe it was, what were we talking? The call. It wasn't call recording, but it was the disclaimer. And the disclaimer is very ambiguous as it's defined. What are we supposed to do here?
Yeah, so the disclaimer that came out last year, had to be in all of our email signatures. We had to state it on all of our phone calls, and it was that we didn't represent every plan in the area, and that if they wanted to learn about other plans, they could call 1-800-Medicare. And there was a lot of, I think, uproar about that. But ultimately, when AEP got here, I didn't hear a peep about it. People are just putting it on their email. Sunfire even has a button you can push that will read that disclaimer for you. And Sunfire, I use along with Sunfire. It's just our white labeled version, Simply Enroll, our white labeled version of that. But I think this year what they've come out and done now is broaden that even more to say, or initially they wanted us to list every plan that we represented. Well, here in the DFW area, there's probably close to 70 different plans hosted by about a dozen carriers. So that's a lot to really say in a disclaimer. And is it really necessary? So I think they clarified now and said, the disclaimer must now mention the number of organizations and the plans represented. So you can quickly say, I don't represent every plan in the area, but I do represent 25 different plans that are held by 5 different MA organizations. In marketing materials, the final rule does suggest that all MA sponsors they represent must be stated. So again, I think that there's still some ambiguity around this topic as well. The carriers will likely be coming out and giving us very clear definition on the disclaimers. So and also in our Sunfire Simply Enroll tool, we'll also have that verbal disclaimer available come AEP.
Certain other things that were referenced in the proposed regs. I was disappointed in this, actually. The sharing of a beneficiary's contact information from one TPMO to another. We were understanding that if I call into the 1-800 number, that my information is going to remain with that one source. But instead, this opens the door to lead aggregators abusing the system again. Any comment on that?
Yeah, like you, I was disappointed to see that they left that out. Really, that would have been extremely disruptive. So why was this rule? You always have to go back and ask yourself, why would somebody create a rule like this? and this is just my opinion, but I think that we heard about customers, members, beneficiaries being targeted multiple times by phone numbers they didn't know, being targeted over and over again. And when somebody calls into a call center, they may respond to, TV ad, a print ad, radio, digital, and they give what's called permission to contact. And there's also rules or guidelines in the final rule that say permission to contact on a BRC is now 12 months. United had previously put in their rules of engagement that it was 9 months. So now, again, that was one of the things people really didn't know where carriers stood. But 9 months was a rule we always used because it was written by UHC. Now we have a rule written by CMS. It says 12. There was some talk about it being 6. I think 12 is certainly good. But if somebody's calling in and they're giving permission to contact, even on a digital BRC, that can be sold to another call center. So if they didn't sell them a plan, but they got PTC, then that's a lead now that they can sell. So I think that call centers, some of them are really, really good at getting PTC and then selling that off to another call center, or they generate a ton of leads through digital electronic BRCs, and then they can't work enough of them in their call center, so they sell them to other call centers. And what happens is that same PTC is being sold over and over. And so beneficiaries are being targeted by people, not just from that initial call, but multiple times after. In the field, we develop BRCs. We've been doing it for years. And it was always a generic form of advertising that we didn't have to get approved by the carriers because it didn't have their logo, didn't have any benefit information on it. And so it was an easy way for us to capture PTC because we're all limited by, calling people due to these CMS guidelines. We could take that same BRC and we could give it to multiple agents and it would have caused the same effect. But obviously field agents weren't that aggressive. In the call center world, they're trying to monetize every single call that comes in. Even with this value-based program they have now through Sunfire and Connecture, where they can provide that lead to a physician and then get paid. Again, they didn't have to sell them a plan, just make them interested in value-based care, have a conversation with the provider, and that was an extra bonus that they would get from that provider group. So these, different methods of monetizing these calls is real. That's how these companies make money. And we've all seen their stock, they've suffered big time in the last couple of years. They're struggling big time. So they're trying to figure out ways to compete and to stay profitable. And I think ultimately the beneficiary in this case was abused. And so they are now clamping down on this. And I think there was obviously a lot of pushback, or they wouldn't have curbed this for a final year or another year rather, but I was really disappointed, and I hope that there's more discussion around this topic moving forward.
And in a similar manner, but a little different topic, we do a lot of lead generation by advertising educational events. And they're not necessarily BRCs, but rather an open invitation that if somebody wants to go down to the library on Saturday morning at 10 o'clock to attend a Medicare 101 and get education, that's a very popular and really quite legitimate way to solidify yourself as an expert in the field and encourage people to do business. However, in these proposed regs, the new sort of final regs, they're requiring a 12-hour cooling off period after an educational event. What's your take on that?
For me, it's no big deal, really. I think that our intention at educational events has always just been to get a lead card, be able to schedule a subsequent appointment, be that advisor that explains Medicare, set yourself up as a local expert. Generally, I don't think agents were trying to meet with somebody immediately after in that same venue to take an enrollment. Not to say people weren't, hey, I'm liking what you're saying. I want to talk about plan information. I kind of waited till the last minute. Yeah, does that happen? Sure. But at that time, you could also say, well, I can't meet with you here, but I can meet with you at the coffee shop next door, or I can meet with you, at your home. It just specifically states that a sales event cannot occur within 12 hours of an educational event at the same location. So I think that's the critical component, same location.
it kind of goes back to like the 48-hour scope where a person calls in. They're not necessarily calling in to sign up right then and there. They're beginning the process, and the educational events should be still a legitimate way for agents to market themselves. So it doesn't really concern me too much. And again, all these regulations are really a response from CMS that they're reacting to the types of complaints to Medicare that they're getting, and they're just simply trying to put some guardrails on it to minimize some of those complaints. In a similar manner, though, people, when they market themselves, they've been using the word Medicare or the logo of Medicare, and now they're going to start placing some discrete limits around the use of the word Medicare, so that it doesn't appear that the person's representing Medicare, but that might cause some disruption. A lot of people use the word Medicare in their website or on their business card. How do you think this is going to impact us?
Let me make one more final comment on the last topic real quick, and that just was that scope of appointments are no longer allowed at educational events, but lead cards are. So there is a difference, right? A scope of appointment sets that 48-hour cooling off period, talks about the plans you're going to discuss, but lead cards, getting their contact information is still allowed. So I just wanted to clarify that. Yeah, so moving on to the use of the Medicare name, logo, ID card was also referenced. I think that Florida really led the charge on this, and we've already been dealing with it with some of our agencies there, where they would not allow the word Medicare to be in your agency name. And it wasn't a matter of just creating a DBA. You had to actually change the name of your business. And that can be very costly and time consuming. So a lot of, agents and agencies were scrambling to, if they were non-resident in multiple states, they're having to work with our contracting team and, file all new contracts in multiple states, changing out their tax ID number and things of that nature. So it's very disruptive. I've had several conversations with some of our partners that use the word Medicare in their name. They're already looking to rebrand. And so I think that while, again, there's some more ambiguity in this, I mean, what does discrete use mean? How is a carrier going to define discrete use? So in my mind, it's not representing yourself as Medicare, right? That's why the guideline is in place. They don't want you looking like you're Medicare, as many of the commercials do. Let's face it. I mean, the Medicare hotline, are we serious? That sounds like Medicare to me. And so I think, again, going back to why was this rule created, I think there's a lot. If you're a regulator and you're looking at these commercials, you're saying these guys are trying to make themselves look like they're from Medicare. How can we stop that? And so that's really why the rule was created. Now, if I've got an agency, Texas Medicare Solutions, are they really in that same category? No, I mean, that's clearly an agency. We need to, as marketers, we need to be able to provide a description of what it is we do. We offer Medicare products. So again, I think that there's a lot to unfold in this rule specifically on what does discrete use really mean? What are the guidelines, around usage of the Medicare card? A lot of the carriers use the Medicare card. So are they going to have to change and pivot and reformat a lot of those pieces? We'll see. But I've been hearing from a lot, and many are go ahead. They're taking the steps to change their name now rather than wait and this rule come out right before AEP and they're having to scramble. So there are some that are using acronyms. I used the example of TMS or Texas Medicare Solutions now rebranding to TMS Brokerage. So, getting creative of how can they maintain that name but sort of not use the word Medicare.
Tame it down a little bit. Well, we've hit on most of the big things, but there was one other thing I wanted to ask you about, and that's regarding, and this probably won't affect us or the independent agents as much, but if you're doing radio advertising or TV advertising, and you're saying that you have service area benefits, like for example, if a person, let's say Humana has a $2,000 dental benefit in the Dallas area, but it's $5,000 in another area. How is it that the advertisers are going to draw those lines so that they're only representing the plans that are available in the plan service area?
Yeah. I think everybody can kind of chuckle on this one because the Joe Namath ads, right? Said we had Part B givebacks of the full Medicare Part B premium rate across the country, which we all knew wasn't the case. So people are calling in saying, hey, I see I can get 145.50 back on my Part B or whatever the dollar amount was. And they're like, no, unfortunately, that plan's not available in your area. So again, I think this is in direct response to TV ads, but also, includes other forms of advertising too that just draws somebody in on a bait and switch. If that benefit isn't available in that area, why are you advertising it? Now, again, they do put a caveat there, which says the exception would be if it's unavoidable because the local or regional media that covers that service area extends out beyond the Medicare service area. So an example here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area could be, the main 7 counties here include a certain benefit, a Part B give back, for example. But if you get out into East and West Texas, where a lot of these networks broadcast to, that may not be available. So that's a scenario I can understand. But do they play it to their advantage? I mean, if you're then maybe working with a media company that's only national, are you all of a sudden excluded from that? So it'd be interesting to see how this all really plays out, and will we see those same ads? Because we all know when we see them, hey, that's not available here. But will there be ways to kind of skirt around it?
Right. Well, I have one last final comment, and then I'll pitch it back to you for a wrap up. I think the best thing we can do as a marketing organization is to try and do what we can to do the right thing, to lead our distribution in the right manner, with the idea that if you do the right thing by the beneficiary, if your intentions are true and real to help them to improve their situation, that you shouldn't worry. Obviously, you need to pay attention to the guidelines, but the bottom line is, do right by the customer and you should be okay. Any final thoughts?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think don't panic. When you see these rules, and you look at it as being disruptive, know that there's going to be solutions. We're keeping a close eye on this as we go through the summer months. We attend all the major carrier conferences, and these are going to be big topics of conversation, and we'll keep you up to date with anything that changes. But I would just say that, yeah, to your point, do what's right for the customer. That's really what CMS is aiming to do here. And I think there's some bad actors out there, and my hope is that these rules will weed some of them out and just make it a healthier industry overall.
Well, always insightful to have good conversations with my Medicare geek buddies, and you're top of the list there. So thanks for your comments, Josh. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Well, I want to say thank you again to Mike and Josh for bringing this information. If you guys are listening on one of the podcast platforms or YouTube, just know we're going to have a recap of all this information. It will be on our website. So you'll go to thebrokerageinc.com/final rule, all one word, thebrokerageinc.com/final rule. These guys have put together a great set of notes and takeaways. So we're going to put that on our blog as well. So thank you so much for listening.